The city lights sparkled through the floor-to-ceiling windows of the penthouse, but nothing inside shined brighter than the ego of its owner. Daniel Harrington stood among his wealthy friends, a crystal glass in hand, laughing at jokes that weren't really funny. At 35, he had everything money could buy: luxury cars, designer clothes, and a bank account that kept growing while he slept. Tonight was another one of those parties where people with too much money gathered to feel important. The champagne flowed freely, and so did the gossip. Daniel's friends were the same type as him: rich, bored, and always looking for the next thrill. The catering staff moved quietly through the crowd, carrying trays of expensive appetizers. Most guests didn't even look at them. They were just part of the background, like the furniture or the expensive paintings on the walls. But Daniel noticed one woman who stood out, not because she was loud or dramatic, but because she carried herself with a quiet strength. Her name was Rosa Martinez, and she worked for the catering company. She was a heavy-set woman in her early 30s with kind eyes and steady hands. While other staff members seemed nervous around the wealthy crowd, Rosa moved with confidence. She smiled politely when guests took food from her tray, even when they didn't say thank you. "Look at that one," whispered Greg, one of Daniel's oldest friends, nodding toward Rosa. Imagine someone actually wanting to be with her. The comment was cruel, but it sparked laughter around the group. Daniel watched as Rosa's smile flickered for just a moment. She had heard them, but instead of responding or looking upset, she simply moved to another part of the room, her head held high. That moment of dignity, instead of earning respect, gave Daniel a terrible idea. "I could do it," he said suddenly, his words slightly slurred from champagne. "I could make her fall for me." His friends erupted in laughter. "You? The man who only dates models?" "Please," said another friend named Trevor. "You wouldn't last a week pretending to be interested." Daniel's jaw tightened. He hated being doubted, even about something as ridiculous as this. His entire life had been about proving he could do anything, have anything, win anything. This felt like just another challenge, another game to win. "How about we make it interesting?" Daniel said, his competitive nature taking over. "I'll not only make her fall for me, I'll marry her. Give me 3 months." The room went quiet for a moment before exploding with shocked laughter. "Marry her? You're insane," Greg said, but his eyes sparkled with interest. "There's no way you'd actually go through with a wedding." "Want to bet on it?" Daniel challenged. Within minutes, the bet was set. If Daniel could convince Rosa to marry him within 3 months, his friends would pay him $100,000. The money didn't matter to any of them, they all had plenty. But the entertainment value? That was priceless to these bored millionaires. They shook hands on it, grinning like schoolboys planning a prank. Daniel felt a rush of excitement. This would be his most entertaining project yet. He didn't think about Rosa's feelings or what this might do to her. In his world, people were either winners or losers, players or played. And he always made sure he was on the winning side. As the party continued, Daniel watched Rosa work. She moved efficiently, professionally, never complaining even when guests were rude. At one point, an older woman snapped her fingers at Rosa like she was calling a dog. Rosa simply smiled and asked how she could help. That patience, that grace under pressure, Daniel filed it away. He would need to understand her to win this game. When the party ended and the catering staff began cleaning up, Daniel approached the company manager. "The woman with the dark hair, the one handling the appetizers, what's her name?" "Rosa Martinez," the manager replied. "She's one of our best. Very reliable, very professional." "Why do you ask?" "Just curious," Daniel said smoothly. "She did excellent work tonight." The manager beamed, proud that his staff was being noticed. "She's also a pastry chef. Works at a small bakery downtown during the day. She only does catering on weekends for extra money." Perfect, Daniel thought. Now he knew exactly where to find her. After everyone left, Daniel stood alone in his penthouse, looking out at the city below. Somewhere down there, Rosa was probably heading home, tired from a long night of work, completely unaware that her life was about to be turned upside down. Daniel smiled to himself. He had 3 months to win her over, marry her, and collect his winnings. It seemed almost too easy. After all, he was charming, rich, and knew exactly how to make people like him. What woman wouldn't want to be with him? He didn't consider that maybe Rosa was different. He didn't think about the fact that she might see through his act. And he definitely didn't imagine that this cruel game might change him in ways he never expected. The bet was on, and Daniel Harrington always won his bets. Or at least that's what he believed as he poured himself another drink and started planning his strategy. He would visit her bakery, play the role of a misunderstood millionaire looking for something real, something genuine. He would make her believe that he saw beyond appearances, that he was different from other wealthy men. It was all an act, of course. But Daniel had been acting his whole life, pretending to care about business partners, pretending to enjoy shallow friendships, pretending that his money made him happy. What was one more performance? As he finally went to bed that night, Daniel didn't feel guilty. He felt excited, energized, ready for the challenge. In his mind, this was just another game, another conquest, another story he'd laugh about with his friends for years to come. He had no idea that this game would cost him far more than $100,000. He couldn't imagine that the woman he planned to mock would end up teaching him the most painful lesson of his life. And he never suspected that 3 months from now he would be the one left broken, not Rosa. But all of that was still ahead of him. Tonight he was just a rich man with a cruel bet, convinced of his own cleverness, blind to the consequences that were coming. The small bakery sat on a quiet street corner, the kind of place most wealthy people drove past without noticing. But Daniel noticed everything now. He had done his research. Sweet Dreams Bakery opened at 6 in the morning and closed at 7 in the evening. Rosa worked there 5 days a week, creating pastries that locals loved but that would never make anyone rich. On Monday morning, Daniel walked in wearing casual clothes, jeans and a simple sweater, nothing too flashy. He wanted to appear approachable, normal, like someone who just happened to discover this charming little shop. The bell above the door chimed as he entered, and the smell of fresh bread and cinnamon wrapped around him like a warm hug. Rosa stood behind the counter, arranging croissants in the display case. She looked up and for a moment recognition flickered in her eyes. She remembered him from the party, but she didn't say anything about it. Professional as always. Good morning. What can I get for you? She asked, her voice friendly but careful. Daniel smiled his most genuine-looking smile. I'm not sure yet. Everything looks incredible. What would you recommend? Rosa's expression softened slightly. People didn't usually ask for her opinion. The cinnamon rolls are fresh from the oven. And if you like chocolate, the double chocolate muffins are really good. I'll take one of each, Daniel said. And a coffee, black. As Rosa prepared his order, Daniel looked around the bakery. It was small but clean, with mismatched chairs and tables that had probably been there for years. Local artwork hung on the walls, and there was a community bulletin board covered with flyers for music lessons and lost cats. It was the opposite of his world, and something about that made it feel more real. Here you go, Rosa said, sliding a plate and coffee across the counter. That'll be $8.50. Daniel paid and sat at a table by the window. He took a bite of the cinnamon roll and had to stop himself from showing genuine surprise. It was actually delicious, better than anything he'd had at expensive restaurants. Rosa was watching him, trying not to be obvious about it. This is amazing, he said, and for once he wasn't lying. Did you make this? A small, proud smile appeared on Rosa's face. Yes, I did. That's my grandmother's recipe. Well, your grandmother was a genius, Daniel said. I'm Daniel, by the way. Rosa, she replied, even though they both knew he probably already knew her name from the party. Daniel became a regular at the bakery. Every morning for 2 weeks he showed up, ordered something different, and always found a way to chat with Rosa. He learned to time his visits for the slower periods when she could actually talk. He asked questions that made her light up, about baking, about her favorite recipes, about the dreams she had beyond this small shop. I'd love to have my own restaurant someday, Rosa admitted one morning, her eyes distant with imagination. Nothing fancy, just a place where people feel welcome. Where the food is made with love, you know? My husband and I used to talk about it all the time. Husband? Daniel asked, his interest suddenly very real. This was information he needed. Rosa's face fell slightly. He passed away 2 years ago. Cancer. We were married for 8 years. Daniel saw the pain in her eyes and felt a small, uncomfortable twinge. He pushed it away. I'm sorry for your loss, he said, and he almost meant it. It sounds like you two had something special. We did, Rosa said quietly. He always believed in my cooking more than I believed in myself. He used to say I could feed the world if I wanted to. This was perfect, Daniel realized. She was lonely, still grieving, vulnerable. She probably hadn't been on a date since her husband died. She'd be easy to win over with a little attention and kindness. The thought should have made him feel clever, but instead it made him feel something else. Something he didn't want to examine too closely. As the weeks went by, Daniel played his role perfectly. He started bringing Rosa coffee before she opened the shop, claiming he was an early riser anyway. He asked about her mother, who she mentioned lived nearby. He remembered small details she shared and brought them up in later conversations, making her feel heard and valued. "You're not like other rich guys," Rosa said one day, catching him off guard with her directness. They were sitting at one of the bakery tables after closing time. Rosa had invited him to stay while she cleaned up, and Daniel had eagerly accepted. "What do you mean?" he asked, though he knew exactly what she meant. "Most people with money don't see people like me," Rosa said simply. "Not really. We're just the help. But you look at me like I'm a real person. Like my thoughts and feelings matter." Daniel felt that uncomfortable twinge again, stronger this time. "That's because they do matter," he said. "Anyone who can't see that is an idiot." Rosa smiled, and Daniel noticed how it transformed her whole face. She had a beautiful smile, the kind that came from somewhere genuine inside. It made him feel like a fraud, which he was, but he quickly pushed that feeling away. By the end of the second month, they were spending time together outside the bakery. Daniel took her to parks and small restaurants, places where his wealthy friends wouldn't see them. He told himself it was to keep the bet secret, but part of him also didn't want to hear their mocking comments. When he was with Rosa, away from his normal life, he could almost forget this was all a game. Rosa was different from any woman he'd dated. She didn't care about his money or his connections. She didn't try to impress him or change herself to fit what she thought he wanted. She was just herself, honest, kind, hardworking, and surprisingly funny. She made him laugh with stories about demanding customers and baking disasters. She listened when he talked about his childhood, about the pressure he'd always felt to succeed. "My father always said emotions were weaknesses," Daniel found himself confessing one evening as they walked through a quiet neighborhood. Success was all that mattered, being the best, having the most. "That sounds lonely," Rosa said softly. "It was," Daniel admitted, then immediately wondered why he'd said that. He wasn't supposed to be sharing real feelings. This was supposed to be an act. But somehow, when he was with Rosa, the lines kept blurring. She made him feel comfortable in a way he'd never experienced. There was no competition with her, no need to prove anything. She accepted him as he was, even though she didn't know who he really was at all. One Saturday evening, Daniel took Rosa to the lake outside the city. They sat on a bench watching the sunset, and Rosa leaned her head on his shoulder. It felt natural, comfortable, right? Daniel's heart was beating faster than it should, and he realized with some surprise that he was nervous. "Rosa," he said, his voice quieter than usual. "I know we haven't known each other long, but I need to tell you something." She lifted her head to look at him, her eyes curious and a little worried. "I think I'm falling for you," Daniel said, and the scary part was that some piece of him actually meant it. "I know that sounds crazy, but you've changed something in me. When I'm with you, I feel like I can be honest, like I don't have to pretend." The irony of saying those words while living a complete lie wasn't lost on him, but he pushed it aside. Rosa's eyes filled with tears. "I was so scared to feel this way again," she whispered. "After losing Thomas, I thought I'd never open my heart to anyone. But you make me feel safe. You make me feel seen." They kissed as the sun set, and Daniel felt a confusing mix of triumph and guilt. He was winning the bet right on schedule. But why did it feel less like winning and more like falling? Over the next few weeks, Daniel prepared for the proposal. He bought a ring, nothing too expensive, because he knew Rosa would feel uncomfortable with something flashy. He planned a simple proposal at the bakery, the place where they'd first really connected. But as the day approached, Daniel found himself lying awake at night, staring at his ceiling. He kept seeing Rosa's smile, hearing her laugh, feeling the way she held his hand. He thought about how she'd trusted him with her grief, her dreams, her heart. His friends kept texting, eager for updates, making jokes about the wedding. Each message made Daniel feel worse, but he couldn't back out now. He'd never backed down from a challenge in his life. And it was just a game, right? Just a bet. Just 3 months of his life, and then he'd move on. The morning he planned to propose, Daniel looked at himself in the mirror and barely recognized the man staring back. When had he become someone who could do something this cruel? But he pushed down the doubt, straightened his shirt, and grabbed the ring box. Rosa deserved better than this. But Daniel was too proud, too committed to winning, too afraid of looking weak in front of his friends. So he went to the bakery, got down on one knee, and asked Rosa to marry him, knowing full well it was all built on lies. The morning Daniel proposed, Rosa had woken up thinking it would be just another ordinary day at the bakery. She had no idea that her life was about to change forever, or that the change would eventually break her heart in ways she never imagined. Daniel arrived just as she was opening up, and she noticed immediately that something was different about him. He seemed nervous, which was unusual. The confident man she'd come to know looked almost scared. "Rosa," he said, taking her hands in his. "These past few months with you have been the happiest of my life. You've shown me what really matters, what real connection feels like." Rosa's heart started racing. She had a feeling she knew where this was going, but she didn't want to assume. Didn't want to hope too much. "I don't want to waste any more time," Daniel continued, and then he got down on one knee right there in the bakery, pulling out a simple, beautiful ring. "Rosa Martinez, will you marry me?" Tears streamed down Rosa's face. After 2 years of grief and loneliness, after convincing herself she'd never love again, here was this wonderful man offering her a second chance at happiness. "Yes," she whispered, then louder. "Yes, yes, yes!" Daniel slipped the ring on her finger, and they held each other in the early morning light of the bakery. Rosa felt like her heart might burst with joy. She couldn't wait to tell her mother, her friends, everyone who'd worried about her being alone. The wedding was planned quickly, just 3 weeks away. Daniel insisted on having it at his estate, saying he wanted to give her a beautiful day. Rosa had hesitated. She didn't need anything fancy, but Daniel convinced her that he wanted to celebrate their love properly. What Rosa didn't know was that Daniel had immediately texted his friends after she said yes. Within hours, they were planning the wedding as their final entertainment, their grand finale to the cruelest bet they'd ever made. Rosa's mother, Carmen, was overjoyed but also worried. "Mija," she said one evening as they looked at wedding dresses, "are you sure about this? You've only known him a few months." "I know it's fast, Mama," Rosa replied, holding a simple white dress against herself. "But after Thomas died, I learned that life is short. When you find happiness, you have to grab it. Daniel makes me happy." Carmen studied her daughter's glowing face and decided to trust her judgment. Rosa had been through so much pain. If this man could make her smile again, who was she to question it? The wedding day arrived with perfect weather. Daniel's estate looked like something from a fairy tale, with white flowers everywhere and elegant decorations. Rosa felt overwhelmed by the beauty of it all. She stood in the bridal room with her mother and 2 close friends, wearing her simple white dress, feeling like the luckiest woman in the world. "You look beautiful." "Sweetheart," Carmen said, adjusting Rosa's veil with tears in her eyes. "I wish your father was here to see this. And Thomas would be happy for you, you know. He'd want you to find love again." Rosa hugged her mother tightly, grateful beyond words for her support. Meanwhile, in another part of the estate, Daniel's friends were gathering, barely able to contain their amusement. They wore expensive suits and carried phones ready to record what they considered the comedy show of the year. "I can't believe you actually did it," Greg whispered to Daniel, slapping him on the back. "When she walks down that aisle, I'm going to lose it." "Remember, keep it subtle," Daniel said, but his voice lacked its usual confidence. "We don't want to ruin it before I get through the ceremony." Trevor smirked. "Don't worry. We'll be the perfect gentleman. The laughter can wait until after." The ceremony began, and Rosa walked down the aisle on her mother's arm. She looked radiant, genuinely happy, completely unaware of the mocking glances being exchanged among Daniel's friends. Her own small group of guests, her mother, 2 friends from the bakery, and a few neighbors, sat on one side, beaming with happiness for her. Daniel's side was filled with wealthy people in designer clothes, most of whom Rosa had never met. She assumed they were Daniel's business associates and friends. She noticed some of them whispering and looking at their phones, but she thought they were probably just busy people who couldn't fully disconnect even for a wedding. As Rosa reached the altar and took Daniel's hands, she looked into his eyes with complete trust and love. Daniel looked back at her and felt something crack inside his chest. This woman was giving him her whole heart, believing every lie he'd told her, trusting him completely. And he was about to seal that betrayal with vows that meant nothing to him. The officiant began speaking, but Daniel barely heard the words. He was too aware of his friend's eyes on them, too conscious of the phones pointed in their direction, too busy trying to ignore the voice in his head screaming that this was wrong. "Daniel, do you take Rosa to be your lawfully wedded wife?" the officiant asked. Daniel hesitated for just a second too long. Rosa squeezed his hands, thinking he was just emotional. "I do," he finally said. "Rosa, do you take Daniel to be your lawfully wedded husband?" "I do," Rosa said without hesitation, her voice strong and sure and full of hope. "Then by the power vested in me, I now pronounce you husband and wife. You may kiss your bride." Daniel leaned in and kissed Rosa, and she kissed him back with all the love in her heart. The small group of Rosa's guests applauded warmly. Daniel's friends applauded too, but their applause had a different tone to it, one that Rosa was too happy to notice. The reception was held in Daniel's massive backyard. There was expensive catering, an open bar, and a live band. Rosa's friends seemed overwhelmed by the luxury, staying close together like they didn't quite belong. Carmen kept a watchful eye on everything, and though she smiled, something felt off to her about Daniel's friends. "Your friends seem nice," Rosa said to Daniel as they shared their first dance. "Though they're pretty different from people I usually hang out with." "They're just work associates, really," Daniel said, which was almost true. His real relationship with them was based on shared wealth and boredom, not genuine friendship. "You're the only person here who really matters to me." That part, Daniel was disturbed to realize, felt true. Somewhere along the way, his feelings had gotten confused. This was supposed to be simple. Trick the woman, marry her, collect the money, move on. But nothing felt simple anymore. After their dance, Daniel's friends pulled him aside while Rosa was chatting with her mother. They handed him an envelope with $100,000 in cash. "You did it, man," Greg said, still grinning. "I honestly didn't think you'd go through with the actual wedding." "This is legendary." Trevor held up his phone. "I got some great footage. We should watch it at the next poker night." Daniel took the envelope and felt sick. The money felt heavy in his hands, dirty somehow. "Yeah," he said without enthusiasm. "Great. What's wrong?" Greg asked. "You won the bet. You should be celebrating." "I am celebrating," Daniel said, forcing a smile. "It's my wedding day." His friends laughed, thinking he was joking. But Daniel walked away from them, tucking the envelope into his jacket pocket where it felt like it was burning through the fabric. The rest of the reception passed in a blur. Rosa glowed with happiness, introducing Daniel to her small circle of loved ones. Her mother pulled him aside at one point. "You make my daughter very happy," Carmen said, looking him directly in the eyes. "Please take care of her heart. She's been through enough pain." "I will," Daniel promised, and hated himself for the lie. As the evening ended and guests started leaving, Rosa hugged her mother goodbye. "Thank you for being here, Mama. Thank you for supporting me." "Always, mija," Carmen said, kissing her daughter's forehead. "Call me tomorrow and tell me all about your first night as a married woman." Daniel and Rosa waved goodbye to the last guests and walked back into the estate together, now as husband and wife. Rosa was exhausted but happy, leaning against Daniel's shoulder. "Can you believe we're married?" she said, looking at the ring on her finger. "Sometimes I think I'm going to wake up and find out this was all a dream." Daniel looked at her tired, happy face and felt a wave of self-hatred so strong it almost knocked him over. "Yeah," he said quietly. "I can't believe it either." That night, lying next to his new wife, who had fallen asleep with a smile on her face, Daniel stared at the ceiling. The envelope of money sat in his jacket pocket across the room, but it didn't feel like a victory. It felt like the worst thing he'd ever done. He'd won the bet. He'd proven he could do it. But as he listened to Rosa's peaceful breathing beside him, Daniel realized he might have made the biggest mistake of his life. And the worst part was, she had no idea what was coming. Daniel had expected married life to be temporary and annoying, something to endure for a few weeks before finding an excuse to end it. He'd planned to claim they rushed into things, that they weren't compatible, that it was better to part ways now before things got more complicated. He'd already been thinking of excuses during the wedding reception, but living with Rosa turned out to be nothing like he'd imagined. The first morning after the wedding, Daniel woke up to the smell of coffee and something baking. He found Rosa in his massive, barely used kitchen, wearing one of his shirts over her pajamas, humming quietly as she made breakfast. The cold, modern kitchen that had always felt like a showroom suddenly felt warm and alive. "Good morning, husband," she said with a shy smile when she noticed him. "I hope you don't mind. I couldn't sleep in, and I thought I'd make us something special for our first breakfast as a married couple." Daniel looked at the pancakes shaped like hearts, the fresh fruit arranged on a plate, the coffee poured into his favorite mug that he'd only mentioned using once. Something twisted in his chest. "You didn't have to do all this," he said. "I wanted to," Rosa replied simply. "Taking care of people I love makes me happy. Is that weird?" Daniel thought about all the women he'd dated before. Models and socialites who'd never set foot in a kitchen, who saw domestic tasks as beneath them, who were with him for his money and connections. Rosa was asking if caring for him was weird. "No," he said quietly. "It's not weird at all." Over the next few days, Rosa transformed Daniel's penthouse. She didn't change the expensive furniture or modern art. She knew they weren't hers to change. But she added small touches that made the space feel like a home instead of a hotel. Fresh flowers appeared on the tables. Throw blankets were draped over the harsh leather couches. She organized his chaotic home office and left little notes for him to find. "Have a great day. And don't forget to eat lunch." Daniel found himself looking forward to coming home, which had never happened before. His penthouse had always been just a place to sleep and occasionally host parties. Now it was somewhere he actually wanted to be. Rosa cooked dinner most nights, and they were the best meals Daniel had ever eaten. Not because the ingredients were expensive or the presentation was fancy, but because they were made with care. Rosa would tell him stories while they ate, about funny customers at the bakery, about her childhood in a small town, about her grandmother who taught her to cook. "My abuela used to say that you can taste the cook's mood in the food," Rosa said one evening over homemade pasta. "If you cook angry, the food tastes angry. If you cook with love, people can taste that too." Daniel looked at his plate and realized that's what was different. His entire life, food had been either fuel or status. He'd eaten at the most expensive restaurants where chefs were artists and meals were experiences. But he'd never tasted love before. "What are you thinking about?" Rosa asked, noticing his quiet mood. "Nothing," Daniel lied. "Just that you're an amazing cook." But he was thinking about much more than that. He was thinking about how Rosa asked about his day and actually listened to the answers. How she laughed at his jokes, even the bad ones. How she fell asleep reading on the couch and looked peaceful and trusting. How she was teaching him to see his own apartment differently, to appreciate things he'd never noticed before. Rosa started adding plants to the penthouse, something Daniel had never considered. "Plants make a space feel alive," she explained as she positioned a fern near the window. "Plus, taking care of something else is good for the soul." Daniel watched her water the plants each morning and found himself thinking about her words. He'd never taken care of anything or anyone in his life. He'd always been focused on taking opportunities, taking credit, taking whatever he wanted. The idea that caring for something could be good for you was foreign to him. His friends started texting less frequently, which was a relief. When they did reach out, their messages made him uncomfortable. "How's married life treating you?" Greg texted one day. "When are you going to tell her the truth and end this thing?" Daniel stared at the message for a long time before responding. "Not yet. Timing isn't right." But the truth was, Daniel didn't know when the timing would ever be right. Every day that passed made it harder to imagine ending things. Rosa had quit her catering jobs to focus on the bakery and spend evenings with Daniel. She'd started talking about their future together, maybe taking a culinary course, eventually opening that restaurant she'd always dreamed about. "With your business knowledge and my cooking, we'd make a great team," she said excitedly one night. "I mean, only if you'd want to. I know you have your own business to run." Daniel found himself actually considering it, imagining what a restaurant partnership with Rosa might look like. Then he'd remember that none of this was real, that their entire relationship was built on a lie, and he'd feel sick. Rosa noticed his mood swings but misinterpreted them. "Is work stressing you out?" she'd ask. "You seem distracted lately." "Just some complicated business deals," Daniel would say, which wasn't entirely untrue. His marriage had become the most complicated deal of his life, and he had no idea how to close it without destroying everything. One evening, Rosa suggested they have dinner with her mother. Daniel had been avoiding this, knowing that Carmen saw through people in a way that made him nervous. But he couldn't keep making excuses without Rosa becoming suspicious. Carmen's small apartment was nothing like Daniel's penthouse, but it was warm and filled with photos and memories. She served them homemade tamales and watched Daniel carefully throughout the meal. "So, Daniel," Carmen said, "Rosa tells me you've been very supportive of her dream to open a restaurant." "Of course," Daniel said. "She's incredibly talented. And you're willing to help her achieve this dream?" Carmen pressed. "Not just with money, but with your time, your commitment?" Daniel felt like he was being examined under a microscope. "Yes," he said, and realized he actually meant it. Somewhere along the way, Rosa's dreams had started to matter to him. After dinner, while Rosa was in the kitchen helping her mother clean up, Carmen pulled Daniel aside. "My daughter has been through a lot of pain," she said quietly but firmly. "Losing Thomas nearly broke her. If you're not serious about this marriage, if you're going to hurt her, tell her now. Don't let her fall deeper before you walk away." Daniel felt like Carmen could see right through him, straight to the rot inside. "I won't hurt her," he said, and desperately wanted it to be true. "See that you don't," Carmen replied, her eyes hard. "Because if you do, you'll answer to me." That night, lying next to Rosa after they returned home, Daniel couldn't sleep. He kept thinking about Carmen's words, about how Rosa had already survived so much pain, about how he was planning to add more. "Daniel?" Rosa whispered in the dark. "Are you awake?" "Yeah, can I tell you something?" She sounded vulnerable, almost scared, of course. "I was afraid I'd never feel this way again," Rosa said softly. "After Thomas died, I thought my heart was permanently broken. But you've made me believe in love again. You've made me believe in happy endings. I just wanted you to know that. I wanted you to know how much you mean to me." Daniel felt like he couldn't breathe. Rosa reached for his hand in the darkness and squeezed it, trusting and loving and completely unaware that she was sleeping next to someone who'd married her as a joke. "I love you," Rosa whispered. Daniel should have said it back immediately. It would have been easy to say those 3 words that Rosa needed to hear. But they stuck in his throat because for the first time in his life, Daniel was afraid that if he said them, he might actually mean them. And if he meant them, what did that make him? A liar who'd fallen for his own lie? A cruel man who'd accidentally developed feelings for his victim? "I love you too," he finally said, and hated that he couldn't tell if it was true or not. Rosa fell asleep shortly after, peaceful and content. But Daniel lay awake until dawn, trapped in a prison of his own making, understanding for the first time that the person he'd hurt most with this bet might end up being himself. 3 months into the marriage, Rosa had settled into a comfortable routine. She still worked at the bakery during the day, but she'd cut back her hours so she could spend more time at home. She was researching culinary courses and working on a business plan for the restaurant she dreamed of opening. Life felt good, felt right, felt like she'd finally found her way back to happiness. Daniel had become more distant lately, but Rosa attributed it to work stress. He spent long hours in his home office, and sometimes she'd catch him staring at his phone with an expression she couldn't quite read. When she asked about it, he'd smile and say everything was fine, so she chose to believe him. One Wednesday afternoon, Rosa left the bakery early because she wasn't feeling well. She'd been fighting a headache all morning, and her boss insisted she go home and rest. She let herself into the penthouse quietly, not wanting to disturb Daniel if he was on an important call. She could hear him in his office, and she started to head to the bedroom. But then she heard laughter, not just any laughter, the kind of cruel, mocking laughter that made her stomach turn. Rosa moved closer to the office door, which was slightly open. She could see Daniel sitting at his desk, his laptop open in front of him. He was on a video call with several men she recognized from the wedding, his friends who'd seemed so amused during the ceremony. "Come on, play it again," one of them was saying. "I need to see her face when you said I do." Daniel's finger moved toward the keyboard, and Rosa watched in horror as he pulled up a video file. Her own face appeared on the screen, her wedding day walking down the aisle, looking so happy and hopeful. The video showed the entire ceremony from someone's phone, but it was the audio that destroyed her. The voices of Daniel's friends were captured, whispering comments that had been too quiet for Rosa to hear at the time. "I can't believe he's actually going through with this. Look at her face. She really thinks he loves her. Easiest $100,000 anyone ever made." Rosa's hand flew to her mouth to stop herself from crying out. Her legs felt weak, but she couldn't move. couldn't look away from the screen where her happiest moment was playing out as entertainment for these cruel men. Daniel's voice came through the speakers. "All right, enough. I've watched this enough times. Don't tell me you're feeling guilty," one of the friends said, laughing. "It was just a bet, man, a joke. She'll get over it." "Yeah," Daniel said, but his voice sounded hollow. "Just a joke." The video continued playing, and Rosa watched herself say "I do" with so much love and trust in her voice. She watched Daniel kiss her while his friends snickered in the background. She saw herself smiling at the camera, completely unaware that her entire marriage was built on a lie, that the man she'd given her heart to had only married her to win money and entertain his friends. Rosa's headache disappeared, replaced by a pain so deep it felt like her chest was cracking open. She thought about every moment they'd shared, every kiss, every laugh, every time she'd told him about her dreams and fears. She thought about how she'd compared him to Thomas, how she'd thought he was nothing like other rich men who looked down on people like her, but he was exactly like them. He was worse than them, because he'd made her believe in love again, made her think she was worthy of being loved, only to reveal that it was all a performance, a game, a bet. Rosa must have made a sound, a gasp or a sob, because Daniel suddenly turned toward the door. His face went completely white when he saw her standing there. "Rosa," he said, jumping up from his chair. "I didn't know you were home." "Clearly," Rosa said, her voice shaking. She walked into the office, and Daniel's friends on the screen went silent, realizing they'd been caught. "Rosa, wait," Daniel started. "A bet?" Rosa said, tears streaming down her face. "You married me for a bet? For money? As a joke?" Daniel closed his laptop, cutting off his friends. "It's not what it sounds like, really." Rosa's voice rose. "Because it sounds like you and your horrible friends made a bet to see if you could trick me into marrying you. It sounds like you've been laughing at me this whole time. It sounds like every single thing you ever said to me was a lie." "Not everything was a lie," Daniel said desperately. "Rosa, please let me explain." "Explain what?" Rosa shouted. "Explain how you thought it would be funny to marry a woman like me. Explain how you convinced me to trust you, to love you, to believe I deserved happiness again. Explain how you used my dead husband's memory to manipulate me." "I never meant," Daniel started, but Rosa cut him off. "You never meant to get caught," she said bitterly. "That's what you never meant. Tell me, Daniel, when were you planning to end this? When were you going to tell me the truth? Or were you just going to disappear one day and leave me wondering what I did wrong?" Daniel couldn't answer because he didn't have a good answer. The truth was, he hadn't figured that part out yet. He'd been so confused by his own feelings that he'd just been delaying the inevitable. Rosa laughed, but it was a terrible sound, full of pain. "I actually loved you," she said, looking at him like she'd never seen him before. "I compared you to Thomas. I thought you were special. I thought you saw me as more than just... Rosa, I did see you," Daniel said, moving toward her. "I do see you. These past few months, you've changed me. You've shown me—" "Don't," Rosa said, backing away from him. "Don't you dare try to make this about how I changed you or taught you something. I'm not here to be your lesson. I'm not your self-improvement project. I'm a person whose heart you broke for entertainment." She pulled off her wedding ring and threw it at him. It bounced off his chest and fell to the floor. "Rosa, please," Daniel said, and he was crying now too. "I know I don't deserve it, but please let me explain. My feelings changed. This became real for me." "Nothing about this was ever real," Rosa said coldly, "and nothing you say now will ever make this okay. You knew I'd been through pain. You knew I'd lost someone I loved. You knew I was vulnerable, and you used all of that to manipulate me. That's not a mistake, Daniel. That's cruelty." She walked to the bedroom and started throwing her clothes into a suitcase. Daniel followed, watching helplessly as she packed up the life she'd built in his home over the past 3 months. "Where will you go?" he asked. "To my mother's," Rosa said without looking at him. "Where I should have stayed in the first place. She tried to warn me. She said something felt off about you. I should have listened." "Your mother warned you about me?" Daniel asked, surprised. "She's a good judge of character," Rosa said, zipping up her suitcase. "Unlike me, apparently. I kept telling her you were different, that you really saw me, that you loved me for who I was. I defended you to her. God, I was such a fool." She picked up her suitcase and walked toward the door. Daniel grabbed her arm gently. "Rosa, wait, please. I know I hurt you, but I can make this right. I can—" Rosa pulled her arm away. "Make it right?" she repeated. "You can't make this right. You can't undo what you did. You can't give me back the trust I gave you. You can't erase the fact that when I was falling in love with you, you were laughing at me with your friends. I wasn't laughing, Daniel said desperately. I swear I wasn't, but you didn't stop them either, did you? Rosa said, looking him directly in the eyes. You heard them make fun of me and you stayed quiet because you were in on the joke. You were the joke master. This whole thing was your idea. Daniel had no response to that because it was true. I'm filing for divorce, Rosa said, her voice flat now, emotionless. Don't try to contact me. Don't come to the bakery. Don't send flowers or letters or anything else. You've done enough damage. Rosa, I love you, Daniel said, and he realized as he said it that it was true. Somewhere in the middle of his cruel game, he'd actually fallen in love with her. Rosa smiled sadly. You know what the worst part is? She said. I almost believe you. I think maybe you did develop real feelings for me. But it doesn't matter because the foundation was rotten from the beginning. You can't build something real on lies, Daniel. You just can't. She walked out the door, leaving Daniel standing alone in his penthouse that suddenly felt cold and empty again. He sank to the floor, picked up the wedding ring she'd thrown at him, and finally understood what he'd lost. It wasn't just Rosa. It was the person he'd started to become when he was with her. It was the possibility of being someone better, someone worthy of love. It was the chance at a real, honest life instead of the shallow, meaningless existence he'd been living. Daniel sat on the floor of his penthouse for hours, holding Rosa's ring, surrounded by all the small touches she'd added to make his house feel like a home. The plants she'd bought were already starting to wilt without her care. The throw blankets she'd arranged looked out of place against his modern furniture. The notes she'd left him were still scattered around, "Have a great day," and "Don't forget to eat lunch." Cheerful messages from a woman who'd loved him while he was betraying her. He'd won his bet. He'd proven he could do it. But as he sat there alone, Daniel realized he'd lost something far more valuable than $100,000. He'd lost the best thing that had ever happened to him, and he had no one to blame but himself. The first week after Rosa left, Daniel barely functioned. He called in sick to work for the first time in his career. He ignored calls from his friends. He sat in his penthouse, surrounded by the remnants of the life Rosa had tried to build with him, and felt the full weight of what he'd done. The plants she'd bought started dying because he forgot to water them. The kitchen that had smelled like fresh bread and coffee every morning sat empty and cold. The little notes she'd left around the apartment, messages he'd once found annoying, now felt like artifacts from a happier time he'd destroyed. Daniel tried calling Rosa dozens of times, but her number was blocked. He sent texts that never delivered. He even drove to the bakery once, but through the window, he saw her mother Carmen working behind the counter. When Carmen saw him, the look she gave him was so full of anger and disappointment that Daniel turned around and left without going inside. He tried to return to his normal life, to pretend nothing had changed. He went to work meetings and acted like everything was fine. But nothing was fine. Food tasted like nothing. His expensive penthouse felt like a prison. His business accomplishments seemed meaningless. His assistant noticed the change. "Mr. Harrington, are you feeling all right?" she asked one day after finding him staring at his phone instead of reviewing an important contract. "You seem distracted lately." "I'm fine," Daniel lied, but they both knew it wasn't true. His mother called one evening, something she rarely did. They had never been close. She'd divorced his father when Daniel was young and had always been more interested in her charity work than in her son. But somehow she'd heard about Rosa leaving. "Your father's assistant told me you got married," she said without preamble, "and apparently got divorced shortly after. Care to explain?" Daniel considered lying, but he was too tired. "I did something terrible, Mom," he admitted. "I married someone as part of a bet, and she found out." The silence on the other end of the phone was deafening. Finally, his mother spoke, her voice cold with disappointment. "A bet? You married someone as a bet?" "Yes." "Daniel, I raised you better than that," she said. And Daniel almost laughed because she hadn't really raised him at all. "Actually, no. Your father raised you to be exactly like that. Cruel and selfish and thinking people are just objects for your entertainment." "I know," Daniel said quietly. "Do you?" his mother challenged. "Because your father spent his whole life treating people like garbage, and he died alone and miserable with nothing but money to keep him company." "Is that what you want?" "No," Daniel said, and meant it. Then figure out how to be better than him, his mother said. Figure out how to be better than the man I divorced. Because right now you're exactly like him. And that breaks my heart. She hung up without saying goodbye, and Daniel sat there holding the phone, feeling like a child who'd disappointed everyone who mattered. His friends reached out eventually, wanting to celebrate his successful bet and plan their next entertainment. Daniel met them at their usual bar, but everything felt different now. There he is, Greg shouted when Daniel arrived. The man who actually went through with the craziest bet of all time. That was legendary, man. The others laughed and patted Daniel on the back, ordering expensive drinks to celebrate. But Daniel didn't join in the celebration. He looked at these men, people he'd called friends for years, and saw them clearly for the first time. They were empty, bored people who filled their lives with money and cruelty because they had nothing else. Just like he had been. What's wrong with you? Trevor asked, noticing Daniel's mood. You won. We all paid up. You should be happy. Happy, Daniel repeated. You think I should be happy? Yesha, Greg said, confused. You proved you could do it. You made a woman fall for you just like we bet you couldn't. That's a win in my book. Daniel stood up suddenly, his chair scraping against the floor. Everyone at the table looked at him in surprise. That wasn't a win, Daniel said, his voice shaking with emotion. That was the worst thing I've ever done. I hurt someone who trusted me. I broke the heart of someone who'd already survived so much pain. I destroyed something real for money I didn't even need. Dude, calm down, Trevor said, laughing nervously. It was just a joke. She'll get over it. Just a joke? Daniel repeated. She was a real person with real feelings. She'd lost her husband to cancer. She'd spent 2 years learning to live again. And I used all of that to manipulate her because you guys bet me I couldn't. The table went quiet. Other patrons in the bar were starting to stare. I was wrong, Daniel continued, looking at each of his friends. And all of you were wrong for encouraging it. We sit here in our expensive clothes, drinking our expensive drinks, thinking we're better than everyone else. But we're not better. We're worse. We're empty people who hurt others because we're too bored and too broken to do anything meaningful. Jesus, Daniel, Greg said, looking uncomfortable. It's not that deep. You're acting like you committed a crime. I did commit a crime, Daniel said. Maybe not a legal one, but a moral one. And I have to live with that for the rest of my life. I have to know that I broke someone's heart on purpose. That I made her doubt herself and doubt love and doubt that she deserves to be happy. He pulled out the envelope of money they'd given him. He'd never spent $1 of it, and threw it on the table. Take your money back. I don't want it. I never wanted it. I wanted to prove I could do something. And all I proved is that I'm capable of being cruel. Congratulations to all of us. Daniel walked out of the bar and never looked back. He deleted their numbers from his phone. He removed himself from their group chats. These weren't his friends, they never had been. They were just people he'd surrounded himself with because misery loves company, and they'd all been miserable without knowing it. But cutting off toxic friendships didn't fix anything. Daniel still came home to an empty penthouse every night. He still thought about Rosa constantly. He stalked her social media profiles until he realized she'd blocked him on everything. He drove past her mother's apartment building sometimes, hoping to catch a glimpse of her, feeling like the pathetic stalker he'd become. Work became meaningless. Daniel sat in board meetings and couldn't bring himself to care about profit margins or market shares. His business partners noticed his lack of focus and started questioning his decisions. One of them pulled him aside after a particularly disastrous presentation. "What's going on with you, Daniel?" he asked. "You're not yourself lately." "Maybe I'm finally becoming myself," Daniel replied. "Maybe the person I was before was the fake one." He started going to therapy, something he'd always considered a waste of time for weak people. His therapist, Dr. Patterson, was a woman in her 60s who didn't seem impressed by his money or his accomplishments. "So you married someone as part of a bet," she said during their first session, her expression neutral. "Tell me why you thought that was acceptable." "I didn't think it was acceptable," Daniel said. "I just didn't think about it at all. I saw it as a challenge, like closing a business deal or winning a negotiation." "You saw a human being as a business deal," Dr. Patterson clarified. "Yes," Daniel admitted, feeling shame wash over him again. "Why do you think you were capable of that level of dehumanization?" she asked. Daniel had to think about it. "Because that's how I was taught to see the world." he finally said. My father always said emotions were weakness. Success was everything. People were either useful or obstacles. I learned to win at all costs and never question whether the cost was too high. And now? Dr. Patterson asked. Now I know the cost was too high, Daniel said. I won the bet, but I lost everything that actually mattered. Over the following weeks, therapy forced Daniel to confront truths about himself he'd been avoiding his whole life. He was emotionally stunted. He'd built walls around his heart so high that he couldn't form real connections. He'd measured his worth in money and accomplishments because he didn't know how else to measure it. He'd hurt Rosa not because she deserved it, but because he was broken, and broken people break things. The question now, Dr. Patterson said during one session, is whether you want to fix what's broken in you. Not to win Rosa back, that may never happen, but to become someone who wouldn't do something like this again. I want to fix it, Daniel said, but I don't know how. It starts with accountability, she said. Not just saying you're sorry, but actually understanding the full impact of what you did and why it was wrong. Then it continues with consistent change over time. Becoming a better person isn't a one-time decision. It's a choice you make every single day. Daniel left therapy that day and walked through the city for hours. He saw couples holding hands and felt a pang of loss. He saw families laughing together and felt lonely. He saw people living ordinary, meaningful lives and realized that's what he'd always been missing: meaning. That night he sat down and wrote Rosa a letter. Not an excuse, not a justification, not a plea for forgiveness. Just an acknowledgement of what he'd done and how wrong it was. He wrote about his therapy, about cutting off his toxic friends, about finally understanding that money and success couldn't fill the emptiness inside him. He didn't expect a response. He didn't even know if Rosa would read it, but he sent it anyway because she deserved to know that he understood the magnitude of his betrayal. 6 months passed since Rosa left, and Daniel's life looked completely different. Therapy had helped him understand himself better, but understanding wasn't the same as healing. He knew now why he'd been capable of such cruelty, but knowing didn't erase what he'd done. The hardest part was learning to live with his guilt while still trying to move forward. Daniel had always believed actions spoke louder than words. So while he worked on himself internally, he started thinking about what he could do externally. Not to win Rosa back, because he understood that ship had sailed, but to somehow honor the person she'd been to him and the lessons she'd taught him. He remembered her dream of opening a restaurant. She'd talked about it with such passion, describing every detail: the warm lighting, the open kitchen where guests could watch chefs work, the menu that would blend her grandmother's traditional recipes with modern techniques. But she'd always said it was impossible, too expensive, too risky for someone like her. Daniel made a decision. He would make that dream possible, but Rosa would never know it came from him. He started researching restaurant spaces in Rosa's neighborhood, the area where she'd grown up and where her mother still lived. He found a perfect corner location that had been a failed bistro. The owner was desperate to sell. Daniel bought it through a shell company, making sure his name was nowhere on the paperwork. Then he hired contractors and designers, again making sure everything was done through intermediaries. He described Rosa's vision to them: warm woods, exposed brick, an open kitchen, space for about 40 guests. Nothing too fancy, nothing that would make Rosa suspicious. Just a beautiful, welcoming space where people would want to gather and eat good food. The tricky part was getting the restaurant to Rosa without her knowing it came from him. Daniel worked with his lawyer to create a fake small business grant program, supposedly funded by an anonymous donor who wanted to support local culinary talent. They made it look completely legitimate with a website and everything. Rosa's name was submitted to the program by an anonymous nominator who praised her skills and described her dream. Of course, Daniel had written the nomination himself, but Rosa wouldn't know that. The grant offered full funding for a restaurant space, initial operating costs, and business consulting. Everything Rosa would need to make her dream come true. While that plan was in motion, Daniel made other changes in his life. He'd been volunteering at a women's shelter that Rosa had sometimes donated baked goods to. Not to run into her, she'd stopped donating after their divorce, but because it felt like the right thing to do. Work that mattered. Work that helped people. At first, the shelter director was suspicious of Daniel's motives. Rich people sometimes volunteered for photo opportunities or tax write-offs, not because they genuinely cared. But Daniel showed up every Saturday morning for months, working in the kitchen, preparing meals, cleaning up, listening to stories from women who'd survived abuse and hardship. "Why do you do this?" one woman asked him one day. Her name was Patricia, and she'd left an abusive marriage with 2 children and nothing else. "You clearly have money. You could be doing anything with your Saturdays." Daniel thought about how to answer. "I did something really terrible to someone I loved," he finally said. "I hurt her badly. I can't undo that, but I can try to be better. I can try to help other people even if I can't help her." Patricia nodded, understanding in her eyes. "That's the hardest thing," she said. "Learning to forgive yourself when you can't fix what you broke." Daniel had never thought about it that way. He'd been so focused on becoming better that he hadn't considered whether he'd ever forgive himself. Maybe he wouldn't. Maybe he shouldn't. One Saturday, Daniel was serving lunch when he looked up and saw Rosa across the room. His heart stopped. She was there with her mother, apparently volunteering for the day. Rosa froze when she saw him, her face going pale. Daniel wanted to say something to explain why he was there, but Rosa grabbed her mother's arm and they left quickly. Daniel's hand shook as he continued serving food. Even after 6 months, seeing her still hurt, she looked different, thinner, tired, like she hadn't been sleeping well. He'd done that to her. After his shift, the shelter director called him into her office. "I need to talk to you about something," she said gently. "Rosa Martinez's mother called me after they left today. Rosa was very upset to see you here." Daniel's stomach sank. "I understand. I'll stop volunteering if my presence makes her uncomfortable." "Wait, hear me out," the director said. "I told Carmen that you've been volunteering here every week for months. That you work hard, that you're genuine, that the women here appreciate you." Carmen was surprised. She didn't know. "Rosa blocked me on everything," Daniel explained. "She doesn't want to know anything about my life." "I respect that." The director studied him. "Carmen said something interesting. She said Rosa hasn't been the same since the divorce, that she's closed off, doesn't trust anyone, barely leaves the bakery except to visit Carmen. She said seeing you here today was the first strong emotion she's seen from her daughter in months." "She hates me," Daniel said. "As she should." "Maybe," the director agreed. "But Carmen asked me to tell you something." She said, "If you're really trying to be better, if this isn't just for show, then keep doing what you're doing." She said the world needs more people who try to fix their mistakes instead of running from them. Daniel felt tears prick his eyes. Carmen had every right to hate him, but instead, she was giving him something like permission to keep trying. "I'll keep volunteering," he said. "But maybe I should change my shift so Rosa never runs into me again." "That might be wise," the director agreed. 2 months later, Rosa received an official-looking letter in the mail. Daniel found out about it through his lawyer who'd been monitoring the grant program. Rosa had won the business grant. She was being given a fully renovated restaurant space, 6 months of operating expenses, and business consulting services, everything she needed to open her dream restaurant. Daniel imagined her reading that letter, maybe not believing it at first, maybe thinking it was too good to be true. He hoped she called the number on the letterhead and verified it was real. He hoped she felt even a fraction of the joy she deserved. Through his lawyer, Daniel tracked the progress of Rosa's restaurant. She accepted the grant. She hired a small staff. She developed a menu that, according to reviews that started appearing online, was incredible. Traditional recipes executed with love and skill. She named the restaurant Second Chances. When Daniel read that name, he had to sit down. Second Chances. Was she thinking about her second chance at happiness after losing Thomas? Her second chance at achieving her dreams? Or did part of her think about giving people second chances, even people who didn't deserve them? He would never know because he couldn't ask her. That was part of his punishment, living with uncertainty, with questions that would never be answered, with the knowledge that he'd helped make her dream come true but could never tell her or receive her gratitude. The restaurant's opening night, Daniel drove to the neighborhood and parked far enough away that he could see the entrance but wouldn't be spotted. He watched people arrive, Rosa's mother, friends from the bakery, neighbors, strangers who'd heard about the new place. Through the window, he could see Rosa in her chef's whites greeting guests, smiling but not quite reaching her eyes. She'd achieved her dream, but Daniel could see she wasn't fully happy. How could she be? He'd broken something in her that maybe couldn't be fixed. The ability to trust completely, to love without fear, to believe that good things were really good, and not secretly tricks. As Daniel drove home that night, he thought about his mother's words on the phone months ago. She'd warned him that he was becoming like his father, cruel and selfish and destined to die alone. Was he still that person? He was trying not to be. But trying wasn't the same as succeeding. He'd given Rosa her restaurant, but he'd also taken her peace. He'd changed his life and his values, but that didn't undo the pain he'd caused. He'd cut off toxic friends and started helping others, but he was still the man who'd married someone as a joke. That night, Daniel wrote another letter to Rosa, not asking for anything, not explaining his actions, just acknowledging her restaurant opening and saying he hoped it brought her all the success and happiness she deserved. He signed it and put it in an envelope but couldn't bring himself to send it. What right did he have to intrude on her life again? She'd told him to leave her alone. The kindest thing he could do was honor that request, even if it meant she'd never know he'd changed, never know he'd made her dream possible, never know that hurting her had broken something in him too. Daniel put the letter in a drawer with the other one he'd written months ago, the one he had sent. Rosa had never responded to that letter, and he didn't expect she ever would. Maybe she'd thrown it away without reading it. Maybe she'd read it and decided he didn't deserve a response. Either way, the silence was his to bear. He lay in bed that night in his empty penthouse. He'd never sold it, though he'd thought about it many times, and wondered if this was what the rest of his life would look like. Trying to be better, helping others where he could, living with the permanent knowledge that the best thing that ever happened to him was something he'd destroyed with his own hands. 9 months had passed since Rosa discovered the truth, and she'd somehow rebuilt a life from the broken pieces Daniel had left behind. Her restaurant, Second Chances, was thriving beyond her expectations. Food critics praised her cooking. Regular customers became like family. The dream she and Thomas had once shared was finally real, even if he wasn't there to see it. But success in business didn't mean healing in life. Rosa still woke up some mornings with a tight feeling in her chest, still caught herself wondering if every kind gesture had a hidden motive, still felt the sting of betrayal whenever she remembered how completely she'd been fooled. Her mother noticed, of course. Carmen always noticed everything. "You're successful but not happy," Carmen said one evening as they closed the restaurant together. "The restaurant is doing well, but you're not doing well." "I'm fine, Mama," Rosa said, but they both knew it was a lie. "You're afraid," Carmen said gently. "Afraid to trust again. Afraid to hope. That man took more from you than just your time. He took your ability to believe in good things." Rosa felt tears welling up. "How do I get that back? How do I stop feeling like everyone who's nice to me might be playing some kind of game?" Carmen hugged her daughter. "Time helps. Therapy helps. But mainly you have to decide that you won't let his cruelty change who you are at your core. You're a loving, trusting person, Rosa. Don't let him take that from you." Rosa had started therapy a few months ago, working through the trauma of the betrayal. Her therapist helped her understand that what Daniel did wasn't about her worth. It was about his brokenness. But knowing that intellectually and feeling it emotionally were two different things. One Tuesday afternoon, Rosa had a meeting with the business consultant provided by the grant program. The consultant had been incredibly helpful over the past few months, offering advice on everything from inventory management to marketing. But Rosa had always felt like there was something slightly off about the whole grant situation. It seemed too perfect, too tailored to exactly what she needed. "I have a question," Rosa said to the consultant during their meeting. "This grant program, who funds it?" The consultant shifted uncomfortably. "I'm not at liberty to discuss the donor's identity. They prefer to remain anonymous. But they specifically chose me," Rosa pressed. "How did they even know about my dream of opening a restaurant?" "Someone who knew about your skills nominated you," the consultant said carefully. "That's all I can tell you." Rosa felt a chill run down her spine. "Who nominated me?" "That information is also confidential." After the meeting, Rosa couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. The restaurant space had been renovated exactly to her specifications she'd only ever shared with Daniel. The grant had appeared right when she needed it most, and the whole program seemed designed specifically for her. She called her mother. "Mama, what if Daniel had something to do with the restaurant grant?" There was a long pause. "Would that change anything?" Carmen asked. I don't know, Rosa admitted. The restaurant is mine now. I've put my heart into it. But if he bought it from me as some kind of guilt payment, then he gave you something you earned and deserved, Carmen said firmly. Your talent made that restaurant successful, not his money. If he helped make it possible, maybe that's his way of trying to do one decent thing after doing something terrible. Rosa thought about that conversation for days. Part of her wanted to investigate, to demand answers, to know the truth. But another part of her was tired of letting Daniel occupy space in her mind. Maybe it didn't matter how the opportunity came to her. What mattered was what she'd done with it. 3 weeks later, Rosa was at the farmer's market buying fresh produce for the restaurant when she saw Daniel. He was across the market, volunteering at a booth for the women's shelter. He wore simple clothes and was helping an older woman carry boxes of donations. He looked different, thinner, more tired, less polished than the man she'd married. Rosa's first instinct was to leave immediately, but something made her stay and watch from a distance. Daniel worked for over an hour, never on his phone, never acting like he was above the work. He spoke kindly to everyone, helped without being asked, and seemed genuinely present in a way the old Daniel never had been. When he finished his shift, Rosa found herself walking toward him before she could talk herself out of it. He didn't notice her until she was right in front of him. "Rosa," he said, his face going pale. "I didn't know you'd be here." "I can leave if you volunteer here?" Rosa interrupted. "Yes," Daniel said quietly. "Every Saturday for the past 8 months. I switched to a different shift after you saw me that one time. I didn't want to make you uncomfortable." Rosa studied his face, looking for signs of the arrogant man who'd married her as a joke. But all she saw was exhaustion and sadness and something that looked like genuine regret. "Did you fund my restaurant?" she asked bluntly. Daniel's expression told her everything before he spoke. "How did you figure it out?" "It was too perfect," Rosa said. "Too specifically designed for my dream. A dream I only ever talked about with you." Daniel looked down at his feet. "I'm sorry. I know you told me to stay out of your life. I just wanted to do one thing right. I wanted you to have what you deserved, even if I couldn't be part of it." Rosa felt a complicated mix of emotions. Anger that he'd interfered in her life. Gratitude that he'd made her dream possible. Confusion about why he'd done it secretly instead of trying to use it to win her back. "Why didn't you tell me?" she asked. "Because you deserved to believe it was yours," Daniel said simply. "If you'd known it came from me, it would have been tainted. This way you could believe in yourself and your success without me being part of it. That felt like the least I could do." They stood in awkward silence for a moment. People moved around them in the busy market, but Rosa felt like they were in their own bubble. "I got your letter," she finally said. "The one you sent months ago." Daniel looked surprised. "You read it?" "Eventually," Rosa admitted. "I almost threw it away. I was so angry. But I read it about a month ago when I couldn't sleep one night." "And?" Daniel asked, his voice barely a whisper. "And it didn't fix anything," Rosa said honestly. "You can't apologize your way out of what you did. But it helped me understand that what you did wasn't really about me. It was about you being broken." Daniel nodded slowly. "I was broken. I still am in some ways. But I'm trying to fix it. Not to win you back, I know that's not possible. Just to be better than I was." Rosa believed him. She could see it in his eyes, in the way he carried himself, in the fact that he'd been volunteering at a shelter for months without any expectation of reward. This wasn't the same man who'd proposed to her as part of a bet. "I need coffee," Rosa said suddenly. "There's a cafe around the corner." "Want to talk?" Daniel looked shocked. "Are you sure?" "No," Rosa admitted. "But I think maybe we both need closure. Real closure, not just anger and silence." They sat at a small table in the cafe, both holding coffee cups they barely drank from. The conversation was hard and honest. Daniel told her about cutting off his toxic friends, about therapy, about realizing he'd been chasing money and success to fill a hole that nothing material could fill. Rosa told him about her struggle to trust anyone, about building walls around her heart, about how the restaurant's success felt hollow because she was afraid to be happy. "I hate that I let what you did change me," Rosa said. "I used to be someone who saw the good in people. Now I'm suspicious of everyone." "I'm so sorry," Daniel said, and his voice cracked. "That's the worst part of what I did. Not just hurting you once, but damaging your ability to trust anyone ever again." "Are you in therapy?" Rosa asked. "Yes, for about 7 months now." Good, Rosa said. You needed it. They talked for over 2 hours. It wasn't forgiveness. Rosa wasn't sure she could ever fully forgive him. But it was understanding. It was seeing each other as complete humans instead of just victim and villain. Can I ask you something? Daniel said as they were leaving the cafe. Your restaurant is called Second Chances. What does that mean to you? Rosa thought about it. It means a lot of things. A second chance at my dream after Thomas died. A second chance at building something meaningful. Maybe even a second chance at believing good things can happen without a catch. Do you believe in second chances for people? Daniel asked carefully. People who've done terrible things. Rosa looked at him for a long moment. I believe people can change, she said slowly. I believe someone can do something unforgivable and still become someone better. But I also believe that change doesn't erase what was done. You're becoming a better person, Daniel, I can see that. But that doesn't undo the person you were when you hurt me. I know, Daniel said. I'll live with what I did for the rest of my life. Good, Rosa said, and there was still some steel in her voice. You should. Over the next few months, Rosa and Daniel saw each other occasionally. Not dates, Rosa was clear about that. Just coffee sometimes or running into each other at the farmer's market. Slowly, carefully, they built something that wasn't quite friendship but wasn't pure pain either. It was complicated and messy and uncertain. Rosa started dating other people, testing her ability to trust again. Some dates went well, others didn't. But she was trying, which was more than she'd been able to do for months after the divorce.